Hi, my name is Ben Curette, and I am the pastor of the Gainesville Seventh-day Adventist Church here in Gainesville, Florida. If you're watching this video, I think it's safe to assume that you want to read the Bible this year, and so do we. Maybe you've read the Bible 100 times, maybe you've started 100 times and never finished, or maybe you've never read the Bible for yourself at all. Our prayer here is that no matter who you are, that the reading of God's Word would be a blessing on your life. Please make sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell on this video because we are going to be posting 1 hour segment every single day until we are done. Our goal is to get this done in 72 to 73 1-hour blocks or 2.5 months. If you'd like to read along with us, we're reading out of the New Living Translation. And if we stutter or mispronounce something, I ask that you be gracious with us. With all that being said, let's jump right into it, a 1 hour segment of the reading of God's Word.
2 Samuel chapter 15. After this, Absalom bought a chariot and horses, and he hired 50 bodyguards to run ahead of him. He got up early every morning and went out to the gate of the city. When the people brought a case to the king for judgment, Absalom would ask where in Israel were they from, and they would tell him their tribe. Then Absalom would say, "You really got a strong case here. It's too bad the king doesn't have anyone to hear it. I wish I were the judge. Then everyone could bring their cases to me for judgment, and I would give them justice." When people tried to bow before him, Absalom wouldn't let them. Instead, he took them by the hand and kissed them. Absalom did this with everyone who came to the king for judgment, and he stole their hearts of all the people of Israel. After 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron to offer a sacrifice to the Lord and fulfill a vow I made to him. For a while your servant was at Geshur in Aram. I promised to sacrifice to the Lord in Hebron, if he would bring me back to Jerusalem." "All right," the king told him, "go and fulfill your vow." So Absalom went to Hebron. But while he was there, he sent secret messengers to all the tribes of Israel to stir up a rebellion against the king. As soon as you hear the ram's horn, his message read, "You are to say, Absalom had been crowned king in Hebron. He took 200 men from Jerusalem with him as guests, but they knew nothing of his intentions." When Absalom was offering sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel, one of David's counselors who lived in Gilgal. Soon many others also joined Absalom, and the conspiracy gained momentum. A messenger soon arrived in Jerusalem to tell David, "All Israel has joined Absalom in conspiracy against you. Then we must flee at once, or it will be too late." David urged his men, "Hurry! If we get out of the city before Absalom arrives, both we and the city of Jerusalem will be spared from disaster." "We are with you," his advisors replied. "Do what you think is best." So the king and all the household set out at once. He left no one behind except 10 of his concubines to look after the place. The king and all the people set out on foot, pausing at the last house to let the king's men move past to lead the way. There were 600 men from Gath who had come with David, along with the king's bodyguard. Then the king turned and said to Ittai, a leader of the men of Gath, "Why are you coming with us? Go back to King Absalom, for you are a guest in Israel, a foreigner in exile. You arrived only recently, and should I force you today to wander with us? I do not even know where you will go. Go on back and take your kinsmen with you, and may the Lord show you his unfailing love and faithfulness." But Ittai said to the king, "I vow by the Lord and by my own life that I will Go wherever my lord the king goes, no matter what happens, whether it means life or death." David replied, "All right, come with us." So Ittai and his men and his families went along. Everyone cried loudly as the king and his followers passed by. They crossed the Kidron Valley and they went towards the wilderness. Zadok and all the Levites also came along, carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. They set down the Ark of God, and Abiathar offered sacrifices until everyone passed out of the city. Then the king instructed Zadok to take the Ark of God back into the city. "If the Lord sees fit," David said, "he will bring me back to see the Ark and the tabernacle again. But if he is through with me, then let him do what seems best to him." The king also told Zadok the priest, "Look, here's my plan. You and Abiathar should return quietly to the city with your son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. I will stop at the shallows of the Jordan River and wait for a report from you." So Zadok and Abiathar took the Ark of God back to the city and stayed there. David walked up the road to the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and his feet were bare as a sign of mourning. And the people were with him, covered their heads, and wept as they climbed the hill. When someone told David that his advisor Ahithophel was now backing Absalom, David prayed, "O Lord, let Ahithophel give Absalom foolish advice." When David reached the summit of the Mount of Olives, where people worship, Hushai the Archite was waiting for him there. Hushai had torn his clothes and put dirt on his head as a sign of mourning. But David told him, "If you go with me, you will only be a burden. Return to Jerusalem and tell Absalom, I will now be your advisor, O king, just as I was your father's advisor in the past. Then you can frustrate and counter Ahithophel's advice. Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, will be there. Tell them about the plans being made in the king's palace, and they will send their sons Ahimaaz and Jonathan to tell me what is going on." So David's friend Hushai returned to Jerusalem, getting there just as Absalom arrived. Chapter 16. When David had gone a little beyond the summit of the Mount of Olives, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, was waiting there for him. He had 2 donkeys loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 bunches of summer fruit, and a wineskin full of wine. "What are these for?" the king asked Ziba. And Ziba replied, "The donkeys are for the king's people to ride on, and the bread and the summer fruit are for the young men to eat. The wine is for those who become exhausted in the wilderness." "And where is Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson?" the king asked him. "He stayed in Jerusalem," Ziba replied. "He said, 'Today I will get back the kingdom for my grandfather Saul.'" In that case, the king told Ziba, "I give you everything Mephibosheth owns." "I bow before you," Ziba replied. "May I always be pleasing to you, my lord the king." As King David came to Bahurim, a man came out of the village cursing them. It was Shimei, son of Gera, from the same clan of Saul's family. He threw stones at the king and the king's officers and all the mighty warriors who surrounded him. "Get out of here, you murderer, you scoundrel," he shouted at David. "The Lord is paying you back for all the bloodshed in Saul's clan. You stole his throne, and now the Lord has given it to your son Absalom." At last you will taste some of your own medicine, for you are a murderer. Why should your dead dog curse my lord the king?" Abishai, son of Zeruiah, demanded, "Let me go over and cut off his head." "No," said the king. "Who asked your opinion, you sons of Zeruiah? If the Lord has told him to curse me, who are you to stop him?" Then the Lord said to Abishai and to all his servants, "My own son is trying to kill me. Doesn't this relative of Saul have even more reason to do so? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to do it. And perhaps the Lord will see that I am being wronged and will bless me because of these curses today." So David and his men continued down the road, and Shimei kept pace with them on a nearby hillside, cursing and throwing stones and dirt at David. And the king and all those who were with him grew weary along the way, so they rested when they reached the Jordan River. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the army of Israel arrived at Jerusalem, accompanied by Ahithophel. When David's friend Hushai the Archite arrived, he went immediately to Absalom. "Long live the king," he exclaimed. "Long live the king." "Is this the way you treat your friend David?" Absalom asked him. "Why aren't you with him?" "I am here because I belong to men who is chosen by the Lord and by all the men of Israel." Hushai replied, "And anyways, why shouldn't I serve you? Just as I was your father's advisor, now I will be your advisor." Then Absalom turned to Ahithophel and asked him, "What should I do next?" And Ahithophel said, "Go and sleep with your father's concubines, for they have left them here to look after the palace. Then all Israel will know that you have insulted your father beyond hope of reconciliation, and they will throw their support to you." So they set up a tent on the palace roof where everyone can see it, and Absalom went in and had sex with his father's concubines. Absalom followed Ahithophel's advice, just as David had done. For every word Ahithophel spoke seemed as wise as though it came directly from the mouth of God. Chapter 17. Now Ahithophel urged Absalom, "Let me choose 12,000 men to start out after David tonight. I will catch up with him while he is weary and discouraged. He and his troops will panic and everyone will run away. Then I will kill only the king, and I will bring all the people back to you as a bride returns to her husband. After all, it is only one man's life that you seek. Then you will be at peace with all the people." This plan seemed good to Absalom and to all the elders of Israel. But then Absalom said, "Bring Hushai the Archite. Let me see what he thinks about this." When Hushai arrived, Absalom told him about what Ahithophel said. Then he asked, "What is your opinion? Should we follow Ahithophel's advice? If not, what do you suggest?" Well, Hushai replied to Absalom, "This time Ahithophel has made a mistake. You know your father and his men. They are mighty warriors. Right now they are enraged as a mother bear who had been robbed of her cubs. And remember that your father is an experienced man of war. He wouldn't be spending the night among the troops. He has probably already hidden in some pit or cave. And when he comes out and attacks, a few of your men fall. There will be panic among your troops, and the word will spread that Absalom's men are being slaughtered. Then even the bravest soldiers, though they are heart of a lion, will be paralyzed with fear. For all Israel knows what a mighty warrior your father is and how courageous his men are." I recommend that you mobilize the entire army of Israel, bringing them from as far as Dan in the north and Beersheba in the south. That way you will have an army as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And I advise that you personally lead the troops. When we find David, we'll fall on him like dew that falls on the ground. Then neither he nor any of his men will be left alive. And if David were to escape into some town, you will have all Israel there at your command. Then we can take ropes and drag the walls of the town into the nearest valley until every stone is torn down. Then Absalom and all the men of Israel said, Hushai's advice is better than Ahithophel, for the Lord has determined to defeat the counsel of Ahithophel, which really was better planned, so he could bring disaster on Absalom. Hushai told Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, what Ahithophel said to Absalom and to the elders of Israel, and what he himself had advised instead. Quick, he told them, find David and urge him not to stay in the shallows of the Jordan River tonight. He must go across at once into the wilderness beyond. Otherwise, he will die and his entire army with him. Jonathan and Ahimaaz had been staying at En-Rogel, so as not to be seen entering and leaving the city. Arrangements had been made for a servant girl to bring them the message they were to take to King David. But a boy spotted them at En-Rogel and told Absalom about it. So they quickly escaped to Bahurim, where a man hid them in a well in his courtyard. The man's wife put a cloth over the top of the well and scattered grain on it to dry in the sun, so no one suspected they were there. When Absalom's men arrived, they asked her, Have you seen Ahimaaz and Jonathan? The women replied, They were here, but they crossed over the brook. Absalom's men looked for them without success and returned to Jerusalem. Then the two men crawled out of the well and hurried on to King David. Quick, they told him, cross the Jordan tonight. And they told him how Ahithophel had advised that he be captured and killed. So David and all the people with him went across the Jordan River during the night, and they were all on the other side of the bank before dawn. When Ahithophel realized that his advice was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went to his hometown, set his affairs in order, and hanged himself. He died there and was buried in his family tomb. David soon arrived at Mahanaim by now, and Absalom had mobilized the entire army of Israel and was leading his troops across the river Jordan. Absalom had appointed Amasa as commander of his army, replacing Joab, who had been commander under David. Amasa was Joab's cousin. His father was Jether, an Ishmaelite. His mother, Abigail, daughter of Nahash, was the sister of Joab's mother, Zeruiah. Absalom and the Israelite army set up camp in the land of Gilead. When David arrived at Mahanaim, he was warmly greeted by Shobi, the son of Nahash, who came from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and by Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lo-Debar, and from Barzillai of Gilead, from Regolim. They brought sleeping mats, cooking pots, serving bowls, wheat and barley, flour, roasted grain, beets, lentils, honey, butter, sheep, goats, and cheese for David and for those who were with him. For they said, You must all be very hungry, tired and thirsty after your long march through the wilderness. Chapter 18. David now mustered the men who were with him and appointed generals and captains to lead them. He sent the troops out in 3 groups, placing one under Joab, one under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and one under Ittai, the man from Gath. The king told his troops, "I am going out with you." But the men objected strongly. "You must not go out," they urged. "If you have to turn and run, and even if half of us die, it will make no difference to Absalom's troops. They will be looking only for you. You are worth 10,000 of us, and it is better that you stay here in the town and send for help if we need it." "If you think that's the best plan, I'll do it," the king answered. So he stood alongside the gate of the town as the troops marched out in groups of hundreds and of thousands. And the king gave this command to Joab, Abishai, and Ittai: "For my sake, deal gently with young Absalom." All the troops heard the king and gave this order to his commanders. So the battle began in the forest of Ephraim, and the Israelite troops were beaten back by David's men. There was a great slaughter that day, and 20,000 men laid down their lives. The battle raged all across the countryside, and more men died because of the forest than were killed by the sword. During the battle, Absalom happened to come upon some of David's men. He tried to escape on a mule, but he had rode under the thick branches of a great tree. His hair got caught into the tree. His mule kept going and left him dangling in the air. One of David's men, saw what had happened and told Joab, "I saw Absalom dangling from a great tree." "What?" Joab demanded. "You saw him there and didn't kill him? I would have rewarded you 10 pieces of silver and a hero's belt. I would not kill the king's son for even 1,000 pieces of silver," the man replied to Joab. "We all heard the king say to you and to Abishai and Ittai, 'For my sake, please spare young Absalom.' And if I had betrayed the king by killing his son, and the king would certainly find out who did it, you yourself would be the first to abandon me." "Enough of this nonsense," Joab said. Then he took 3 daggers and plunged them into Absalom's heart as he dangled still alive in the great tree. 10 of Joab's young armor-bearers then surrounded Absalom and killed him. Then Joab blew the ram's horn, and his men returned from chasing the army of Israel. They threw Absalom's body into a deep pit in the forest and piled a great heap of stones over it, and all Israel fled to their homes. During his lifetime, Absalom had built a monument to himself in the king's valley, for he said, "I have no son to carry my name." He named the monument after himself, and it is known as Absalom's monument to this day. Then Zadok's son Ahimaaz said, "Let me run to the king with the good news that the Lord has rescued him from his enemies." "No," Joab told him, "it wouldn't be a good news to the king that his son is dead. You can be my messenger another time, but not today." Then Joab said to a man from Ethiopia, "Go, tell the king what you have seen." The man bowed and ran off. But Ahimaaz continued to plead with Joab, "Whatever happens, please let me go too." "Why should you go, my son?" Joab replied. "There will be no reward for your news." "Yes, but let me go anyways," he begged. Joab finally said, "All right, go ahead." So Ahimaaz took the less demanding route by way of the plain and ran to Mahanaim ahead of the Ethiopian. While David was sitting between the inner and the outer gates of the town, the watchman climbed the roof of the gateway by the wall. As he looked, he saw a lone man running towards them. He shouted the news down to David, and the king replied, "If he is alone, he has news." As the messenger came closer, the watchman saw another man running towards them, and he shouted, "Here comes another one." The king replied, "He also will have news." The first man runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, the watchman said. "He is a good man and comes with good news," the king replied. Then Ahimaaz cried out to the king, "Everything is all right." He bowed before the king and his face to the ground and said, "Praise to the Lord your God, who has handed over the rebels who dared to stand against my lord the king." "What about young Absalom?" the king demanded. "Is he all right?" Ahimaaz replied, "When Joab told me to come, there was a lot of commotion, but I do not know what was happening." "Wait here," the king told him. So Ahimaaz stepped aside. Then the man from Ethiopia arrived and said, "I have good news for my lord the king. Today the Lord has rescued you from all of those who rebelled against you." "What about young Absalom?" the king demanded. "Is he all right?" And the Ethiopian replied, "May all of your enemies, my lord, both now and the future, share the fate of that young man." The king was overcome with emotion. He went up to the room over the gateway and burst into tears. And as he went, he cried, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Chapter 19. Word soon reached Joab that the king was weeping and mourning for Absalom. All the people heard of the king's deep grief for his son. The joy of that day's victory had turned into deep sadness. They crept back into the town that day as though they were ashamed and had deserted in battle. The king covered his face with his hands and kept on crying, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, my son Absalom!" Then Joab went to the king's room and said to him, "We saved your life today and the lives of your sons, your daughters, your wives, your concubines. Yet you act like this makes us feel ashamed of ourselves. You seem to love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that your commanders and troops mean nothing to you. It seems that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died, you would have been pleased. Now go out there and congratulate your troops, for I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a single one of them will remain here tonight. Then you will be worse off than ever before." So the king went out and took his seat at the town gate. And as the news spread throughout the town that he was there, everyone went to him. Meanwhile, the Israelites who had supported Absalom fled to their homes. And throughout all the tribes of Israel, there was much discussion and argument going on. The people were saying, "The king rescued us from our enemies and saved us from the Philistines, but Absalom chased him out of the country. Now Absalom, who we anointed to rule over us, is dead. Why not ask David to come back and be our king again?" Then King David sent Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, to say to the elders of Judah, "Why are you the last ones to welcome back the king into his palace? For I have heard that all Israel is ready. You are my relatives, my own tribe, my own flesh and blood. So why are you the last ones to welcome back the king?" And David told them and to tell Amasa, "Since you are my flesh and blood like Joab, may God strike me and even kill me if I do not appoint you as commander of my army in his place." Then Amasa convinced all the men of Judah, and they responded unanimously, they sent word to the king, "Return to us and bring back all who are with you." So the king started back to Jerusalem, and when he arrived to the Jordan River, the people of Judah came to Gilgal to meet him and escort him across the river. Shimei the son of Gera, the man from Bahurim in Benjamin, hurried across with the men of Judah to welcome King David. 1,000 other men from the tribe of Benjamin were with him, including Ziba, the chief servant of the house of Saul, and Ziba's 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed down to the Jordan to meet the king. They crossed the shallows of the Jordan to bring the king's household across the river, helping him in every way they could. As the king was about to cross the river, Shimei fell down before him. "My lord, the king, please forgive me," he pleaded. "Forget the terrible thing your servant did when you left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind. I know how I must have sinned. That is why I come here today, the very first person in Israel to greet my lord, the king." Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said Shimei should die, for he cursed the Lord's anointed king. "Who asked your opinion, you sons of Zeruiah?" David exclaimed. "Why have you become my adversary today? This is not a day for execution, for today I am once again king of Israel." Then, turning to Shimei, David vowed, "Your life will be spared." Now Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, came down from Jerusalem to meet the king. He had not cared for his feet, trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes since the day the king left Jerusalem. "Why didn't you come with me, Mephibosheth?" the king asked him. Mephibosheth replied, "My lord the king, my servant Ziba deceived me. I told him, 'Saddle my donkey so I can go with the king,' for as you know, I am crippled. Ziba had slandered me by saying that I refused to come. But I know that my lord the king is like an angel of God. So do what you think is best. All my relatives and I could expect only death from you, my lord, but instead you have honored me by allowing me to eat at your own table. What more can I ask?" "You said enough," David replied. "I decided that you and Ziba will divide your land equally between you." "Give him all of it," Mephibosheth said. "I am content just to have you safely back again, my lord the king." Barzillai of Gilead had come from Rogelim to escort the king across Jordan. He was very old, 80 years old, and very wealthy. He was one of who had provided food for the king during his stay in Mahanaim. "Come across with me and live in Jerusalem," the king said to Barzillai. "I will take care of you there." "No," he replied, "I am far too old to go with the king of Jerusalem. I am 80 years old today, and I can no longer enjoy anything. Food and wine are no longer tasty, and I cannot hear the singers as they sing. I would only be a burden to my lord the king. Just go across the Jordan with the king is all the honor I need. Then let me return again to die in my own town, where my father and my mother are buried. But there is your servant, my son Kimham. Let him go with my lord the king and receive whatever you want to give him." "Good," the king replied. "Kimham will go with me, and I will help him in any way you would like, and I will do for you anything you want." So all the people crossed the Jordan with the king. After David had blessed Barzillai and kissed him, Barzillai returned to his own home. The king then crossed over to Gilead, and taking Kimham with him, all the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel escorted the king on his way. But all the men of Israel complained to the king. The men of Judah stole the king and didn't give us the honor of helping taking you, your household, and all your men across Jordan. The men of Judah replied, the king is one of our kinsmen. Why should this make you angry? We haven't eaten any of the king's food or received any special favors. But there are 10 tribes in Israel, the others replied. So we have 10 times as much right to the king as you do. What right do you have to treat us with such contempt? Weren't we the first to speak of bringing him back to be our king again? The argument continued back and forth, and the men of Judah spoke even more harshly than the men of Israel. Chapter 20. There happened to be a troublemaker there named Sheba, son of Bichri, a man from the tribe of Benjamin. Sheba blew a ram's horn and began to chant, "Down with the dynasty of David. We have no interest in his son Jesse. Come on, you men of Israel, go back to your homes." So all the men of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah stayed with the king and escorted him from the river Jordan to Jerusalem. When David came to his palace in Jerusalem, he took the 10 concubines he had left to look after the palace and placed them in seclusion. Their needs were provided for, but he no longer slept with them. So each of them lived like a widow until she died. Then the king told Amasa, "Mobilize your army of Judah within 3 days and report back that time." So Amasa went out to notify Judah, but it took him longer than the time he had been given. Then David said to Abishai, "Sheba, the son of Bichri, is going to hurt us more than Absalom did. Quick, take my troops and chase after him before he gets into a fortified town where we can't reach him." So Abishai and Joab, together with the king's bodyguard and all the mighty warriors, set out from Jerusalem to go after Sheba. As they arrived at the great stone in Gibeon, Amasa met them. Joab was wearing his military tunic with a dagger strapped to his belt. As he stepped forward to greet Amasa, he slipped the dagger from its sheath. "How are you, my cousin?" Joab said, and took him by the beard with his right hand as though to kiss him. Amasa didn't notice the dagger in his left hand, and Joab stabbed him in the stomach with it so that his insides gushed out onto the ground. Joab did not need to strike again, and Amasa soon died. Joab and his brother Abishai left him lying there and continued after Sheba. One of Joab's young men shouted to Amasa's troops, "If you are for Joab and David, come and follow Joab." But Amasa lay in blood in the middle of the road, and Joab's men saw that everyone was stooping to stare at him. So he pulled him off the road into the field and threw a cloak over him. With Amasa's body out of the way, everyone went on with Joab to capture Sheba, the son of Bichri. Meanwhile, Sheba traveled through all of the tribes of Israel and eventually came to the town of Abel Beth Mecca. All the members of his own clan, the Bichrites, assembled the battle, followed him into the town. When Joab's forces arrived, they attacked Abel Beth Mecca. They built a siege ramp against the town's fortifications and began battering down the wall. But a wise woman in the town called out to Joab, "Listen to me, Joab. Come over here so I can talk to you." And he approached the woman and asked, "Are you Joab?" "I am," he replied. And she said, "Listen carefully to your servant." "I am listening," he said. Then she continued, "There used to be a saying, if you want to settle an argument, ask advice at the town of Abel. I am one of who is peace-loving and faithful in Israel, but you are destroying an important town in Israel. Why do you want to devour what belongs to the Lord?" And Joab replied, "Believe me, I don't want to devour or destroy your town. That's not my purpose. All I want is the man named Sheba, son of Bichri, from the hill country of Ephraim, who has revolted against King David. If you hand him over, this man, to me, I will leave the town in peace." "All right," the woman replied. "We will throw his head over the wall to you." Then the woman went to all the people with her wise advice, and they cut off Sheba's head and threw it out to Joab. So he blew the ram's horn and called his troops back from the attack. They all returned to their homes, and Joab returned to the king at Jerusalem. Now Joab was the commander of the army of Israel. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was captain of the king's bodyguard. Adoniram was in charge of the forced labor. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was the royal historian. Shiva was the court secretary. Zadok and Abiathar were the priests, and Ira, the descendant of Jair, was David's personal priest. Chapter 21. There was a famine during David's reign that lasted 3 years. So David asked the Lord about it. And the Lord said, "The famine has come because Saul and his family are guilty of murdering the Gibeonites. So the king summoned the Gibeonites. They were not part of Israel, but were all that was left of the nation of the Amorites. The people of Israel had sworn not to kill them, but Saul, in the zeal for Israel and Judah, had tried to wipe them out. David asked them, "What can I do for you? How can I make amends so that you will bless the Lord's people again?" "Well, money can't settle this matter between us and the family of Saul," the Gibeonites replied. "Neither can we demand the life of anyone in Israel." "What can I do then?" David asked. "Just tell me and I will do it for you." Then they replied, "It was Saul who planned to destroy us, to keep us from having any place at all in the territory of Israel. So let 7 of Saul's sons be handed over to us, and we will execute them before the Lord at Gibeon, on the mountain of the Lord." "All right," the king said, "I will do it." The king spared Jonathan's son Mephibosheth, who was Saul's grandson, because of the oath David and Jonathan had swore before the Lord. But he gave them Saul's 2 sons, Armoni and Mephibosheth, whose mother was Rizpah, daughter of Aiah. He also gave them 5 sons of Saul's daughter Merab, the wife of Adriel, son of Barzillai from Meholoah. The men of Gibeon executed them on the mountain before the Lord. So all the 7 of them died together at the beginning of the barley harvest. Then Rizpah, the daughter of Ahai, mother of the 2 of the men, spread burlap on a rock and stayed there the entire harvest season. She prevented the scavenger birds from tearing to the bodies during the day and stopped wild animals from eating them at night. When David learned what Rizpah, Saul's concubine, had done, he went to the people of Jabesh Gilead and retrieved the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan. When the Philistines had killed Saul and Jonathan on Mount Gilboa, the people of Jabesh and Gilead stole their bodies from the public square of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hung them. So David obtained the bones of Saul and Jonathan, as well as the bones of the men the Gibeonites had executed. Then the king ordered that they be buried in the tomb of Kish, Saul's father, at the town of Zelah, in the land of Benjamin. After that, God ended the famine in the land. Once again, the Philistines were at war with Israel, and when David and his men were in the thick of battle, David became weak and exhausted. Ishbi-Benob was a descendant of the giants. His bronze spearhead weighed more than 7 pounds, and he was armed with a new sword. He had cornered David and was about to kill him, but Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to David's rescue and killed the Philistine. Then David's men declared, "You are not going out to battle with us again. Why risking snuffing out the light of Israel?" After this, there was another battle against the Philistines at Gob. As they fought, Sibbekai from Hushai killed Saph, another descendant of the giants. During another battle at Gob, Elhanan, son of Jair, from Bethlehem, killed another Goliath of Gath. The handle of his spear was as thick as a weaver's beam. In another battle with the Philistines at Gath, they encountered a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all, who was also a descendant of the giants. But when he defied and taunted Israel, he was killed by Jonathan, the son of David's brother Shimei. These 4 Philistines were descendants of the giants of Gath, but David and his warriors killed them. Chapter 22. David sang this song to the Lord on the day the Lord rescued him from all his enemies and from Saul. He sang, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my Savior. My God is my rock, in whom I find protection. He is my shield, the power that saves me, and the place of my safety. He is my refuge, my Savior, the one who saves me from violence. I called on the Lord, who is worthy of praise, and he saved me from my enemies. The waves of death overwhelmed me. Floods of destruction swept over me. The grave wrapped its ropes around me. Death laid a trap in my path. But in my distress, I cried out to the Lord. Yes, I cried out to my God for help. He heard me from his sanctuary. My cry reached his ears. Then the earth quaked and trembled. The foundations of the heavens shook. They quaked because of his anger. Smoke poured from his nostrils. Fierce flames leaped from his mouth. Glowing coals blazed from him. He opened the heavens and came down. Dark storm clouds were beneath his feet. Mounted on mighty angelic being, he flew soaring on wings of his wind. He shrouded himself in darkness, veiling his approach with dense rain clouds. A great brightness shone around him, and burning coals blazed forth. The Lord thundered from heaven, and the voice of the Most High resounded. He shot arrows and scattered his enemies. His lightning flashed, and they were confused. Then, at a command of the Lord, at the blast of his breath, the bottom of the sea could be seen, and the foundations of the earth were laid bare. He reached down from heaven and rescued me. He drew out of the deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemies, from those who hated me and were too strong for me. They attacked me at a moment when I was in distress, but the Lord supported me. He led me to a place of safety, and he rescued me because he delights in me. The Lord rewarded me for doing right. He restored me because of my innocence, for I have kept the ways of the Lord. I have not turned from my God to follow evil. I have followed all his regulations. I have never abandoned his decrees. I am blameless before God. I have kept myself from sin. The Lord rewarded me for doing right. He has seen my innocence. To the faithful, you show yourself faithful. To those with integrity, you show integrity. To the pure, you show yourself pure. But to the crooked, you show yourself shrewd. You rescue the humble, but your eye watch the proud and humiliate them. O Lord, you are my lamp. The Lord lights up my darkness. In your strength, I can crush my enemy. With my God, I can scale any wall. God's way is perfect. All the Lord's promises prove true. He is a shield for all who look to him for protection. For who is God except the Lord? Who but our God is a solid rock? God is my strong fortress, and he makes my way perfect. He makes me sure-footed as a deer, enabling me to stand on mountain heights. He trains my hands for battle. He strengthens my arm to draw a bronze bow. You have given me the shield of victory. Your help has made me great. You have made a wide path for my feet to keep from slipping. I chased my enemies and destroyed them. I do not stop until they were conquered. I consumed them. I struck them down so they did not get up. They fell beneath my feet. You have armed me with the strength for battle. You have subdued my enemies under my feet. You placed my foot on their necks, and I have destroyed all who hated me. They looked for help, but no one came to their rescue. They even cried to the Lord, but he refused to answer. I ground them as fine as dust of the earth. I trampled them in the gutter like dirt. You gave me victory over my accusers. You preserved me as the ruler over nations. People I do not even know now serve me. Foreign nations cringe before me. As soon as they hear me, they submit. They also lose their courage and come trembling from their strongholds. The Lord lives. Praise to my rock. My God, my rock of salvation, be exalted. He is God who pays back those who harm me. He brings down the nations under me and delivers me from my enemies. You hold me safe beyond the reach of my enemies. You save me from the violent opponents. For this, O Lord, I praise you among the nations. I will sing praises to your name. You give great victories to your king. You show unfailing love to your anointed, to David and all his descendants forever.
Thank you for joining us as we read through the entire Bible together. If this was a blessing to you, let's go ahead and now be the blessing for someone else today. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with your friends and family. And we at Gainesville Seventh-day Adventist Church will see you tomorrow. Be blessed. Bye-bye.